So we're back with the Critical Interference podcast here at CEMUS. We did one episode in 2020, like a test episode, and then it's been quiet and we've been back in person. Now we are back to being confined to our closed offices or at home, which is fine. This will probably be a shorter period. So it's great to be back. And we have a first or a second episode, but a first of this season. With one of my colleagues here at CEMUS, Ashley Farber. You worked with many different courses at CEMUS and different things. And you also traveled to Glasgow and the COP meeting this last November, last year. So I'll do the intro here and we can get going and then get into the conversation. So CEMUS is a joint university center at Uppsala University and the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. CEMUS stands for the Center for Environment and Development Studies. And CEMUS has, for now 30 years, since 1992, worked with student-led education, as it was back then, trying to save the world, working on sustainability, climate justice, so many more issues. We should also say that the views expressed and raised here in the discussions is not a formal representation for Uppsala University, SLU, or CEMUS. It is our own personal views in a professional capacity, so don't misinterpret that way. But we should also feel free to interact and speak our mind and be open about what we feel and think around this moment in human history. And also, of course, you can interact with us on social media and everything like that. So let's get into this and let's start this conversation. Ash, you worked with different courses at CEMUS as a course coordinator, as a student, in the student-led model that CEMUS has of education. And you're from the UK, Northern England, if I remember correctly, originally as well. And you are so many more things that I know of as in a professional capacity. You have other experiences and you worked on different things, I imagine, but also have different takes on all of these issues, but also maybe in a more personal capacity. So basically we start all of these episodes off with, and it sounds kind of grand, but it's your life story and how you ended up getting involved and engaged in these kind of issues and why you have basically stayed engaged, and also partly how you ended up in Uppsala and also ended up at CEMUS. So let's start the story there and travel as far back or not as far back as you like into your own childhood or growing up in the UK.
Yeah, I guess we begin with the monologue of me. I'm Ash, I'm 25 and now working with CEMUS. But I feel like I didn't, as a kid, I didn't really intend to get here. So as Daniel said, I'm from the north of England, quite a working class town. And in the UK, a lot of advertising based around the military is sort of like, if you're poor, working class, go off and join the military and escape this life that you have. So from being really young, that was kind of my game plan. And then I sort of almost got a scholarship and would have ended up going into the military when I was 16. But I did quite well in my exams. So they sort of said, okay, well, you can go to university and become an officer. And then I started looking at, okay, I can do any university course. And I just stumbled across one university that I think it was an ecology course. And they just talked all about their field trips to like the jungle and going to Borneo and all these things. And I was like, that's cool. If I can do anything, like I may as well go to the jungle and then go back to the military afterwards. So then I started my degree. I ended up doing conservation biology with the University of Exeter. And I started there when I was 18 with the intention to kind of go and do this uni course. However it goes, and then go off and join the military. And after I'd been there for only like 2 or 3 months, I was going to join the reserve army. And then they said, oh, you have a circulation problem, so you can't join. And I'd like always had this my childhood dream was just to go off and join the army and have this other life. And then, I trained for it. I was really fit. I passed all the tests. But then this thing that was basically beyond my control was just like, nope, that's it. You're gone. And then I found it quite hard to get focused again at the university. I mean, there was some stuff that was quite interesting, but it all felt so niche that it kind of felt a bit irrelevant to me. And then I was really happy. I picked a course that had a year abroad. And on that year abroad, I studied at CEMUS, which I now teach. And that was the first time that I really felt that the education was like applicable to what was going on in the real world. But when you do ecology, I mean, there's so many specialist studies about, turtles or like a certain type of vole that lives in a forest, and all the, I understand ecosystem ecology is incredibly important, but it's not for me. Like seeing a particular rare species doesn't get me excited compared to talking about climate change and all the kind of different interlinking models. So yeah, I think that's where I thought, okay, this is now what I want to do. So this military thing I'd planned all kind of went away. And I was like, okay, I want to work with climate change and with people and with this much more kind of, not necessarily complex, but complicated. There are so many more different parts of this web that join together. So I was in CEMUS. I studied there for a year when I was on exchange. Went back to the UK. I ended up writing my thesis on the genetic diversity of anemones in Cornwall, exactly as I was saying. Interesting, complex, but I don't know why it matters. Like there's so many problems in the world, and I'm a very kind of applied person in that context that I like to see what's going on, what's the actual purpose of this? What are we helping? And then I finished there. While I was on exchange, I met my girlfriend. We've been together for 4.5 years now. So she's Swedish. So I moved back to Sweden after I graduated, worked a job in a bar for a year, applied for maybe like 50, 70 jobs and heard nothing back. And then thankfully I got a job at CEMUS, more through luck than skill in some ways. The guy who should have got the job got another job working in, I think he moved to Dubai, and they didn't know if his visa would work out or not. And then it did. So I got a late call to say, oh, this guy can't do it, but you can. And then, yeah, I feel like from there, life kind of took off much more, that I was kind of banging at the door for a long time and didn't feel like I was getting anywhere. And then I started my job with CEMUS. So I've taught the climate change leadership course, the critical perspectives of sustainable development in Sweden, helped with the global economy course. And yeah, since then I've been studying, I've been working in different places, I've had internships, I've been to COP. So it's been a really fast, I guess, 2.5 years since I started with CEMUS, but it's been good. I think that's my life story related to climate change, compressed into a couple of minutes.
Yeah, that's a perfect summary, and it's so interesting as well because I mean, I grew up also in you would call it a working class town, or it had a lot of industries. They shut down in the 80s, but it also had this huge Air Force base that also shut down in the late 80s, the 90s, I think it was. So, but then in Sweden, everybody was expected to contribute either through the military or the civil defense. So it was not as prescribed that a certain part of society would go off and do military as a way out of town, but it was very divided in the sense that for some people it was very obvious that they would go on to university, and for some it was like they were so tired of school and it's like, am I going to spend another 5 years or 3 years even at a university and just studying and looking in books? And then it's, of course, it could be very different what you do at university, of course, from high school or going back further as well. So but coming to Uppsala and to CEMUS, because also CEMUS sometimes kind of creates or becomes its own mythology in a sense, or it becomes a lot of surface, but it's hard to kind of pinpoint what in the CEMUS experience, as an old course coordinator, Tim Brick, called it, what specifically connected with you with the learning styles in the courses you came into contact with, and also then in working with courses, what kind of space or what things basically happened that were different and meaningful and relevant for all of this?
I think it was just, I haven't done courses before studying at CEMUS that made me change the way that I lived or the way that I really thought about things. So I'd done courses on ecology. I'd seen Cowspiracy when it came out. I knew eating meat was bad, but I didn't really respond to it. And then with the CEMUS course, we had to do a 30-day challenge, which is basically just try and create a new habit for yourself. If you can do it for 30 days, the science has kind of shown if you can hold the habit for that long, then it will typically progress. And by doing stuff like that, and then discussing in much more detail the issues of, the meat and dairy industry, or like conflict minerals and stuff like that, and buying new clothes, and the whole sort of just the conversations that we had. I think that you change minds through conversations, not information. You give people an information or even like hour-and-a-half movie with some gruesome footage in it of slaughterhouses. That's horrifying for that, hour-and-a-half that you watch it. And then the next day, you're like, I'm never going to do X behavior again because of the shocking material you've just seen. But then you obviously fall back into old habits. Whereas with CEMUS, that all the time you just kind of be around this momentum, this general idea that you'd have chats of people doing these things, and suddenly nothing felt like a sacrifice. It was just an option. Like after going to COP, I spoke with some college students in the UK. My friend's a teacher over there. And they were sort of saying, oh, well, how much do we have to sacrifice to sort of reach the Paris 1.5 goal? And I was saying that, some things aren't a sacrifice. I don't remember the last time I've eaten meat, but I don't miss it. I've not bought new clothes for a long time. I don't miss buying new clothes. I've got an old phone, but I wouldn't be any happier if I had a new phone. That it's like, I think the concept of giving stuff up and sacrifice. And then, I think being at CEMUS, there would always be something going on, that you could never go into the CEMUS library without sort of signing up for a petition or going to someone. You just end up talking and having these conversations that really changed minds. And I think that student-led learning facilitates that. Whereas if you go in and you're told by your lecturer, this professor, some information, then you wouldn't necessarily go and discuss this information afterwards. But when you've sat on a kind of horizontal structure and had a discussion about whatever the topic is, I think that then naturally you continue that discussion, as opposed to just kind of like talking about what you learned in class. You talk about what you talked about in class, and that's how you change minds, I think. And it definitely changed my mind. So I'm very happy to be working there now, but I also feel a responsibility that I hope that I can give other students that I teach now the same kind of mindset change that I had when I was studying.
Yep. And it also feels like sometimes CEMUS in how education are structured, or all the practicalities, what happens in a course. I think it's also interesting that the guest lecturers that come in, although they are selected and there's a new person coming in each session, which is different from a traditional, you have one teacher teaching a course, but also the traditional part of it is that the lectures are like lectures at a regular university. Maybe by selecting certain people, you get people that are more interactive, or people that are better in summarizing the science or the work that they're doing, but also combining traditional components that students recognize with non-traditional ways of making things more interactive, whether it's in workshops or seminars, or expecting the students to be more engaged in examination throughout the courses. I think it's also a combination that has made CEMUS courses better in a sense, but also different in that they create a different kind of meaning, and they maybe become more valuable. Then it should be said also, one CEMUS course compared to another, they could be very different also from year to year, depending on the course coordinators and also the students that of course take the courses, and also if it's a small course or a big course as well. So I think that also makes a difference.
Yeah, and I think, CEMUS has been good, I guess, because it was started to kind of question education in that sense, whereas everything, what's the purpose of the education? So that we have a more intelligent society, or, we can talk about this for days, but then if you go into that exam and you write a great exam and you get the top grade in that, and then you walk out and you don't, what are you then doing with that information? Whereas I think CEMUS kind of embeds that in, especially in my undergrad years, I would be the kind of student that crammed for exams, and you sit there the week before and you learn all this stuff, and then you regurgitate it on the page. You do pretty well, and then you forget about it next week. Whereas if the purpose is to have this like lifelong learning, to change people's perspectives, to change the way that we see, interact with each other, interact with the environment, then you need to sort of set the learning models up for that. But if you just want people to learn information, we have Google. There's no need to remember facts. I think it's a way of thinking that's much more important to try and get across than just sort of learning textbook facts.
Yeah, and I think also the thing you touched upon this or talked about this of giving up things or making sacrifices in relationship to sustainability or consumption, but I think also the thing that has been hard as well in how to pedagogically mix in these issues into courses, or how to build a conversation around certain topics, because I think it's also been a question of how much of a bleak picture of the now or the future you want to paint in a course. But that also comes back to then being honest about things that are happening now, but potentially also, of course, can get worse into the future. But it also, so you don't want to depress the students into being just like, okay, we give up. This is not going any further. For some people, it might be a source for getting more involved and getting angry about things as well. Depends on how you take it. But I think it's also around the frame, because sometimes also a CEMUS course can be very much fall into this eco-modernistic trap of being just, we're just going to build new things that are better. So we just, there's a gas-driven car, you have an electric car. There's nuclear power, or like a fossil fuel plant, you have wind power instead. So that is also then the trap that you kind of get stuck in. We don't want to go into this doomist kind of perspective, but we don't want to either fall into this, we'll just build new stuff. And then it depends on what kind of other space there is, or places that the students can kind of take their energy and time within a course as well, or other engagement.
Yeah, and I think, you kind of see that with the growing trends of eco-anxiety or climate anxiety, particularly with younger people that have this kind of impending fear of doom. And I'm trying to learn. Previously I was I'd say good 3 or 4 years ago, the classic man that didn't really engage with any kind of emotions. And now I'm trying to learn to like let that in and channel that in the right ways. And, sometimes I look at the news and I genuinely cry. When I was at COB, I cried at least 3 times in a way that I hadn't really like engaged with it before. And, I don't think that I wouldn't say I'm someone who has climate anxiety. It doesn't sit on me all the time, only when I watch the news and see I'm reminded of how bad it is. But I think that, to learn to channel that and think, I think, the state of anxiety where you feel trapped all the time and you can't do anything because of that pressure of we're all doomed isn't helpful. But a bit of that emotion is good. A bit of that emotion means that I can put a lot of effort into my work at CEMUS, or walk into business meetings with a bit more anger than other people in the room, because you kind of see the danger that's coming. And, that there is still an option. It's not 100%, it's all definitely gone. There's about I think researcher Karen Anderson said this, there's about a 5% chance that we could reach 1.5. But it's not just chance. It's not, like drawing cards out of a hat or a lottery. It's a choice. It's not chance. And from that, we have that 5% choice to pick the right path. And that you only make that difficult choice if you have some emotion, if you have some, if that comes from anger or sadness or passion or whatever you want to call it. It's kind of important to engage with that a little bit to make sure that we push ourselves in the right direction. And then balancing that with students I think it's just that there isn't necessarily a right answer. It requires all of it and none of it all at the same time. That, not everyone can have an electric car and we can crack on as before, but we also definitely can't carry on with petrol or diesel powered cars. And then that rethinking of, how can we integrate public transport into that so there's no need for cars? And then where does that responsibility then lie? How would you fund that? It's every answer gives you about another 10 questions to answer, and then that kind of endlessly spirals.
Yeah, and it would be really depressing and not a very good way of doing education if CEMUS in a general sense had ready solutions or a ready list of this is where all these kind of journeys end. But also if 2 course coordinators working on a course had like, this is the end destination where we want all our students to arrive practically at the same conclusions and at the same time, rather than, I think maybe that's also been a part of what CEMUS has been trying to do is, like you said, ask questions and not having answers and being critical. And I think also this whole transportation thing is a really good, it's a good way of looking at the issues as well. Because if you say this is the traditional car, then you have the electric car, and then some people talk about we should bike more, and then other people you should just walk more, and then you turn all of this upside down. But then it really depends on who are you in society, what kind of resources and what kind of time do you have as well. So if you have 2 jobs and I don't know, 3 kids and sick relative, then the holiness of being very clean and good and how you transport yourself is not going to be that relevant, then sustainability or living a good life is going to be something that might not be as resource focused or trying to like, I'm so good in all of these categories, which then becomes more of a kind of middle class project in a sense. And maybe also thinking about how, and I think CEMUS has also had that, trying to integrate different perspectives and different ways of relating to it, because also looking at like schools and what is, I mean, trying to think about how can you get sustainability or climate issues more into schools, but maybe like how kids are feeling and like mental health is more important or more relevant as a starting point than just starting with like, are you composting and not flying? It becomes kind of the wrong entry point in a sense. Is there something else we have missed or something we should say about CEMUS? I mean, it's kind of, hopefully this is a very short period that we're not going to be able to interact at CEMUS as a workplace. The courses, or at least the normal sized courses, will continue on campus, so that's good at least. But is there something else that we should cover when it comes to CEMUS as well, and the educational model?
I guess maybe like why it was started. That, I mean, it was started by yourself? Is that correct?
No.
No, it wasn't started by you.
CEMUS this year, 2022, turns 30. So it's a 30-year anniversary year. So it's a full year. So CEMUS has been doing courses since 92. So it's very old. It's been a center for 25 years as well. So no, it was started by Niklas Hellström and Magnus Tuvendal and also others that were involved in suggesting this environment and development studies sustainability course at the university. So CEMUS is very old in that sense. But I came in 10 years later. So I'm also old in that sense.
Yeah, because I think for anyone who studied there, they really see the benefit of, okay, like, you know, I mean, I don't know if it would be useful to have a whole degree program taught in that way or to have sections of it taught in that way. But then, you know, if people who have studied there have said it's so useful, how can this thing spread? You know, how can more, you know, maybe not necessarily universities, but any kind of educational organization can put forward these courses in a similar kind of way to try and spread this learning that's not based on facts, as you were just saying with young people. Okay, how do you feel about this? And I think that it's, especially in an educational setting, asking someone how they feel seems a bit irrelevant. When I first started at CEMUS and you'd be asked to like personally reflect on how you feel about something, I'm like, what's that got to do with anything? But then the older I've got, and then I kind of reflect on that reflection, it's essential that if you don't, I think that's part of the problem of how we've got ourselves in such a deep mess, and why like probably post-COVID, I don't know. But in this point, that when you give people the time to stop and think, okay, like, what do I want? What makes me happy? What am I doing with my time? How am I spending my life? Then you actually start to take a step back and reassess. But when everyone's so quickly, you know, as a student, you're trying to just learn information and then write it in your exam, or you're going to work in a shop or a bar or whatever it is, that you just go through these motions without having the opportunity to step back and reflect. And I think that if you give more people that opportunity to have that time to really sit and think about what do they want to do with their life, what do they value, then we would probably have a vastly different society. But when you keep people that kind of heads down, keep working, don't ask any questions, then it just kind of perpetuates this mess that we're in now.
Yeah, I mean, it's very true that CEMUS could have, if the space had opened up, that is the diplomatic answer, done so much more, both in being like a different physical meeting place in Uppsala, but also with educational, where there's a bachelor master's program. But I think without that happening, or without those spaces opening up, I think also the big change of having international students coming to Uppsala much more, but also exchange students, and also the 2-year masters that was just one semester before, having much more of an elective semester, so you can pick your own courses. That kind of opens up more possibilities of taking different courses, not just at CEMUS. So I think there's things that are better, of course, now since the 90s. And Uppsala was very small. I mean, maybe Sweden was smaller as well in the early 90s as well. And this was after the Cold War and everything else. So a very different time. But 30 years is a lot. I mean, yeah. But maybe we can leave that at that and get into the climate post climate COP26 framing, and just maybe you can get into that if you want to, but maybe leave as much as we can the analysis of the outcomes of the meeting, but rather like focus on the climate work that is needed, and also putting it in some kind of context as well. And I think also that for me, at least, and following the news and everything else happening, I mean, COVID coming back in this new strange form of I don't know how to summarize it even. That is, of course, different from then, and also the relationship between Europe and the West and Russia, and the Russian aggression on the Ukrainian border, and the closeness of Sweden and Northern Europe to Russia. I think that also plays into at least a different feeling, but it is a very different and serious situation as well, for us being here in Sweden. But it affects the world, of course, all of these things. But touching back then on climate work, or whatever we want to call it, climate action sounds like it's tainted by too many greenwashing slogans. But what is your kind of sense and feeling and ideas on how we can kind of continue the work post COP and looking ahead on what is happening next?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a lot of disappointment in COP, but for most people, what the outcome of COP is irrelevant to what I do today. If I choose to do this podcast or to sign petitions or to go and protest, is irrelevant to what happened at COP. And people kind of, if you expect it to be more than it's ever going to be, of course it's going to be a disappointment. You sort of have to treat it for what it is and say, okay, it has a role, and its role only it can do. That you can't get all the world leaders on the same stage in the same rooms negotiating in any other platform. So it does that better than any other. I mean, it could be improved, but it does that role better than any other system. But you've got kind of private sector innovation. You've got universities educating people. You've got the individuals taking to the street with protests or petitions, or you have all of these different things. And I try and stay away from it in teaching, where people talk about this kind of top up or bottom down, or what about kind of local activity, and it's all of it at once. And that there are certain things that as an individual, you only have a small amount of power, but you can always be a collective, and you can always have influence. So I think that if everyone's doing, and then I was going to say if everyone's doing what they can, but then there's the other issue of that for so long we've kind of framed it, or particularly now it's, okay, well, what can we do, instead of asking the question of what needs to be done. And I think that, just seeing in the news today, yesterday I think it came out that the UK is being sued for its net zero claims, because net zero is a new word, and net zero doesn't even guarantee 1.5. It's kind of like we've set this target that's kind of irrelevant to if we're going to meet our goal or not. Net zero doesn't guarantee 1.5. But even then, for this target, people have kind of said, okay, well, how are you going to get there? And the British government's just are like wind turbines and insulation. Well, no, how? Like, that's not a concrete plan. So I think that, you have this increased anger from the public and from NGOs and even from some businesses, from some nations, the nations that are already the most affected are getting too angry to sort of put it off to next year. And I think that, like I was saying before, this emotion of sadness and anger and whatever, if you can channel that to sue your government or change the business that you work for or educate, not everyone is a teacher in a class, but you can all educate your friends, you can educate your family. I think they're sort of looking at what can you do? Where can you be a leader? Not everyone can be a leader in every room they're in, but everyone has some leverage over something. And kind of looking at it that way, I know it makes me feel a bit better about the whole situation, that no individual can solve it, or maybe a couple. But everyone has a bit to do. I don't know if that answers your question, or if it's just a ramble.
Yeah, I'm not looking for like your detailed plan of how you will turn the whole world around. It's rather a that's too big, but it's more a personal take. And I think also strangely, but maybe not strangely at all, but and I don't know if you've seen it, but the Don't Look Up movie on Netflix that I watched just after Christmas, that kind of summarized and changed something in me. I don't know what exactly, or I can't really pinpoint it, but maybe it was several things, but it kind of summarized a life philosophy. That's a big word, but it kind of, and maybe I can find another word. It changed kind of my feeling around the work that I have been doing, but also the work that I continue to do after watching the movie, in the sense that we're just doing as many things as possible we can cram into the work life and also life in general, but we're just trying to do as much as we possibly can. Not all of the things will be worth anything, and they might even be harmful, but hopefully most things are beneficial. But even if we fail at a grand scale with all of this, if you sum this up on a global scale, we kind of come back to the point at the end of the movie where you kind of gather with family or friends, or maybe if you're just gathering with yourself, you come back to a point when you, and it doesn't have to be the end of the world or end of your life in a sense, but you kind of come back to that moment when you have done as much as humanly possible from your perspective, from your capacity and capabilities, and just coping with everything else happening in the world. So I think that also made the whole kind of 2021 and post-COP feelings kind of being turned around in a sense. But also just also feeling that even if I'm not super effective or super stressed and doing 10 things at once, maybe it's fine also to be just slowly doing something that is maybe not going to be the most valuable thing at all in the world as well.
Yeah, and I think looking at it like that kind of releases some pressure from the people who may feel this kind of climate anxiety, that you can, as an individual, you could be really anxious and work 100% of the time, 24 hours a day. You're not going to solve it. That no individual can do that. And when you put so much pressure on yourself, and then it's kind of, I had a time where I knew about climate change, but I was working in a bar, not because I wouldn't rather be doing something to do with climate change, but because I had to pay the bills. And I think it's respecting that, not every, like I was saying, you can't always be a leader in every room. And for some people, if you're just working at the bottom of an organization on the tills of the supermarket or whatever, then, I think for those people to feel despair is kind of unfair, that, we're not acting quick enough. And then again, that at the end of that film, and if you think back to what you value, that if the world was going to end tomorrow, I don't think anyone would go to work. Like, what do you actually care about? Is it this job? Is it this new shiny thing that you've bought? Is it, and then it's, for most people, it's family, friends, loved ones. And I think that pursuing that much more helps us find some better kind of connection. But then also, to go on to a different point of that film, I think it is so needed right now that, we've known that the climate science has been, not necessarily crystal clear 100%, but it's been pointing us in the right way for at least the past 50 years. It's not a shock that climate change is an issue. There's been so many, that we've had 26 COPs across it, but it takes art like that to communicate this issue to more people, that, climate science can be a bit boring. And that is, and, if you want to connect with people, then it kind of takes Leonardo DiCaprio to get that out to the average person. Now, whether, people understand and then act is a different question, but, they have to understand before they can act. And if you're following that kind of trail, then it's really important to come now, and especially at a time when there's so much uncertainty, that we can kind of rebuild the future. That, if COVID never came along, we would probably not be sitting on Zoom right now. We'd be in the same room, and everyone would still be going to work 5 days a week instead of working from home. But now that everything's kind of crumbled and we have the option to rebuild the society, if you were to rebuild it in mind of, okay, what do I actually want, as it kind of shows in the end of that film, then we could end up at it kind of accelerated that change much more than if COVID hadn't come along.
Yeah. And it's very true. Like the ending of the movie, that kind of being in a room with people in a good way. That also, of course, happens and has happened. You talked about CEMUS Library in courses or at CEMUS or in work and other work meetings. And I think also, of course, family and friends and everything is more important than work. But for me, those situations when you had that kind of magic in the room is so important for the work we do. And it feels like the harm being done by having people sitting in their own rooms somewhere in this digital format. This way we're doing this to people, that this works. But having like bigger groups or trying to have discussions or reflections or just the all the things that happens in breaks or afterwards, and people make new friends just coming to a new city, whether it's Uppsala somewhere. I mean, all of those things over time, as this pandemic kind of never ends, you realize that is where a lot of magic happens in all of these situations, and that is so important. And that's also words that are kind of tainted, but it's kind of building community and building some kind of building relationships between people, and that is so much harder in a Zoom setting. But that's we can spend many minutes on detailing how Zoom doesn't work. It works for these kind of things, or international connections as well. And I think it's always the thing is that we, or at least from my perspective, it is also, we don't know what happens next summer, and we don't know what happens next week even, and with all of these things kind of all of these crises joining together or overlapping in a sense, it also feels that you can kind of maybe take a couple of steps back and just find the space where you can actually change something or work with others. And that has to be enough, or it will be enough in that sense. That I think kind of wraps up the climate COP part of all of this. If we would to wrap up this podcast also on a maybe more personal note, how would you say, I mean, people like yourself that came to Uppsala as a student, or people that want to work at CEMUS, I mean, how would you have any like recommendations on or things not to forget when doing that work or coming to Uppsala and studying at CEMUS as well?
I think, trying to get involved in as much stuff. Like, you can see those nice little Pinterest posters that are all about like surrounding yourself with the nice people, with the right people. And there's so much of that. And, if you spend time around the right people who care, people have a passion, whatever that passion is, even if you're into sport or knitting or whatever it might be, surround yourself with those people and you will continue to do that. And the same with climate stuff, and especially, hang around in the CEMUS library and you will find like-minded people. And especially if you're struggling with, the kind of mental health aspect of it, that I think just being around people who equally feel that, at least, you can always stop, but at least there's not the frustration. You're not trying to bang through and be like, why am I not getting through to you? Everyone in this room is on the same level playing with you. We all know there's a problem. I think as well, and this was advice that was given to me by a lecturer. Her name's Delphine. She works for the, I've forgotten her surname, but was going to talk about leadership. And she just said, be human, be yourself. Like, don't try and be this, if you think, oh, how does an activist dress? Have I got to wear certain clothes to go to this protest to be an activist? Oh, I'm in a meeting now. Oh, I can't say this word because, this is in a business setting now. Like, no, be yourself, because otherwise, you're going to feel bad for not being authentic, and you'll probably get found out. That if you're going to do a good job, pick things that you care about, pick things where you can be you, and you'll probably be rewarded for that. I think that society has spent, maybe we're still kind of teetering on the edge of it, that there's a kind of very fake aspect to so much of the things that we do, but people appreciate a genuine concern, genuine passion, genuine people, and to really try and push that. And be open to learn. I've had opinions that I've had even a year ago, 2 years ago, that I've now completely changed on. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. There's so much in society we're kind of taught that you should always stick to your guns, and changing your mind is this kind of sign of weakness. And like, if you don't change your mind, then like, what are you doing? There's no point in learning new things if you're not going to change your mind. So yeah, I think always try and reassess. Why do you think this? What do I don't know that they do? Why do they think that? Yeah, and just keep on keeping on.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that also is important, building on what you just said. Being a student, but also in general in life, you don't always have to be a representative for yourself or your views or values. And you don't have to express all of that through how you look or how you interact in a room. I mean, especially with studying, or if you're taking part in whatever discussion at the university, that is the clash or convergence of ideas and values and other things, and you explore through a hopefully critical conversational dialogue or discussion, different ways of approaching that. But it's not meant to be like, here I am with my long list of who I am and what I represent and what is good and what is bad in the world, because then it becomes very static and very like energy draining in a sense.
Yeah, it makes me think of when I was at COP. I was in the queue something. I got speaking to a woman. I think she was from Kenya, and she was talking about my tattoos. And then she looked at me and said, "You know what? I think aside from the indigenous people, you're probably the most tattooed person here." And I was like, "I think I am the most tattooed, like, white guy. That doesn't really make sense." But then, to have that difference, that I've gone there as me, I'm not going to cover them up. And if you want to have pink hair or tattoos on your face or dress a certain way, then you should always be welcome for your intellect, not your appearance, for your ability to talk to people, not based on how you look or any sort of thing superficial that's kind of superfluous to what's going on at the events.
Yeah, and everybody is needed in this struggle, more struggle for others than maybe myself, but yeah, so that is important, I think. I think this is a good note to end on, but and we haven't prepared questions, or you're not prepared in any sense, but since we started the podcast, I think Spotify bought up the Anchor platform that we're on, that distributes the podcast. But then that also means that I think, I haven't tried this out, but I can add a song, like from any artist in the world, at the end of the program. And I think if it's on another platform, you probably have to play, if you're listening to this, have to play the song yourself. But is there anything and it doesn't have to be politically correct or feel like it's connected to anything we talked about, but is there any song you're playing now, or any song that's been followed you throughout life that is central to you?
I don't know. I would probably say War by a band called Idols. So they're a UK post-punk band. And it's just really angry. And a lot of their stuff is very political and very on point to the state of the UK, the state of inequality. And I guess it's like I was saying, of trying to use an emotion, that I get angry and I listen to some angry music, and that's what makes me work hard. So yeah, get angry, and then you'll be propelled to do something. I mean, like, don't necessarily break stuff, but channel it something good.
Yep. Okay. With that, we'll finish. And thanks, everybody. We'll get better and better at this. And Ash, you will be continuing doing the podcast with me, with different guests, people you've connected with in Glasgow, but also others. So thank you so much. And I hope everything with the technology worked out. And I'll try to send us off here with the final, or the intro tune as the outro tune. So thanks, everybody. And this will hopefully be up now in January. And keep up all the good work out there.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.